Spring of 341. The air in Seleucia-Ctesiphon hangs thick with the scent of river mud and blooming date palms, the Tigris lapping lazily at the city's quays like a serpent too sated to strike. You stand in the shadow of the great arch, the Sasanian capital's heart, pulsing with the low hum of merchants haggling over spices from the east. Their voices a murmur beneath the call of Zoroastrian priests, chanting from fire altars that flicker like captive stars. The sun beats down hot and unyielding, turning the whitewashed walls to blinding sheets, and your skin prickles with the salt of sweat, the dust of 1,000 feet trampling the flagstones. Then the sound cuts through drums, deep and relentless, echoing from the royal palace, where King Shapur II holds court his throne, a mountain of gold and lapis. The crowd parts and they come chains rattling like dry bones. The Christians of the city, men and women, herded from their homes after the revolt. That wasn't a revolt at all, just a refusal to bow to the double tax, a whisper of loyalty to a foreign god-emperor across the border. Their robes are torn, faces gaunt from days without bread, and the smell hits you, now sharp and acrid fear, sweat mingled with the iron tang of blood from fresh lashes. Your eyes adjust to the horror unfolding in the square. Soldiers in scale armor, their spears glinting, drive the prisoners toward the execution scaffolds erected overnight, wood still oozing sap. A bishop, his mitre askew, leads them in prayer, his voice steady as a heartbeat amid the gasps of the onlookers. The first blade falls a wet thud that silences the drums for a breath. Heads roll into the dust bodies slump, and the priests nod. Approval their fire altars fed with the smoke of burning scriptures. One woman, a nun, with eyes like polished onyx, spits defiance as they bind her to the post. The saw's teeth bite first into her shadow, then her flesh. The crowd turning away as the sound rises a rasp like tearing silk. Constantius II, emperor across the frontier, reads the dispatches from fleeing merchants and weeps in his Antioch palace, his quill scratching protests to the east that go unanswered. What kind of empire crafts such a harvest from its own fields? What mind turns faith into treason and cities into abattoirs? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic torture and sexual violence against the innocent acts woven into the fabric of an empire's machinery of control. These details are historically documented, drawn from the Syriac Acts of the Persian Martyrs, Sozomen's ecclesiastical history, written within a century, Eusebius's accounts of Roman correspondence, and corroborated by archaeological remnants of razed churches in Susa and Seleucia. Peer-reviewed works like Joel Walker's analysis in The Legend of Mar Kardog and Richard Payne's A State of Mixture affirm their authenticity, though numbers may swell in hagiographic fervor. If these shadows stir something too raw, step away now. There's no shame in guarding your peace. For those who remain know this, we'll traverse them not to revel in the dark, but to dismantle the gears that ground souls to dust. These aren't tales for thrill, they're blueprints of what empires become, when faith is deemed a fault line, warnings etched in the bones of the forgotten. This wasn't vengeance for swords raised in open rebellion. This was erasure, a calculated protocol where revolt meant not uprising with arms, but the quiet sin of prayer in Aramaic under a Zoroastrian sky. The Christians of the Sasanian realm, merchants in Ctesiphon, scribes and Susa weavers in Beth Lapat, hadn't stormed palaces or toppled idols. Their revolt was a bishop's refusal to collect a war tax in 339, a ripple from Constantine's letter, claiming patronage over them like distant kin. Shapur II king, since his mother's womb, saw not subjects but assets leaking loyalty to Rome, a fifth column in the shadow of fire temples. What followed wasn't chaos born of fury, but a machine edicts dispatched like couriers on royal roads. Magistrates armed with tallies of the faithful scaffolds raised in every provincial square, from the Zagros to the Euphrates. Over 40 years, from 339 to his death in 379, it claimed thousands. Sozomen tallies, 16,000 named martyrs. Though modern scholars like Geoffrey Herman, in his studies of Sasanian hagiography, caution the figures sifting legend from ledger, yet the bones in mass graves near Carca di Leiden bear silent witness. The stakes, an empire spanning from the Indus to the Levant. Zoroastrianism, its spine locked in eternal chess with Rome. Constantine's conversion in 312 had flipped the board. His sons Constantius and Julian wielded the cross as both shield and sword. Shapur's response doubled the tax on heads bowed to Christ. Then when Bishop Simon bar Sabbae demurred, unleashed the Magi to root out Roman sympathizers. Cities fell not to siege engines, but to inquisitions. Churches torched virgins veiled in accusations of sorcery. Nobles flayed for funding baptisms. It horrified Roman emperors not for piety alone, but politics. Constantius II's envoys pleaded in 344, "Spare our brethren," while Julian later mocked the barbarian cruelty in his Caesars even as he waged holy war. Yet this machine ground on reducing thriving Christian quarters to ash heaps their inhabitants to examples strung on gibbets. The question isn't whether you can stomach the ledger of the lost. It's whether you're willing to remember it not as ancient dust, but as the ghost in our own bureaucracies where dissent is taxed to death, where borders breed suspects of faith. In boardrooms today, algorithms flag disloyal voices. In forgotten archives, these martyrs whisper that erasure starts with edicts, ends with empires cracking under their own weight. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, turning silence into solidarity. To understand what happened to the Christians of Persia's cities, you need to understand the machine that birthed it, a colossus of clay cylinders and fire rites spanning 3 centuries by Shapur's time. The Sasanian Empire rose in 224 AD from the ashes of Parthian fractiousness, Ardashir-Wagbayan slaying the last Arsacid to crown himself Shahanshah, King of Kings, in the fires of Nakshi-Rostam. By the 4th century, it was a network of satrapies stitched by royal roads from Bishapur's rock reliefs to the silk entrepôts of Merv. Its economy, a web of tribute from Armenian highlands and Indian spices. Its military, a phalanx of cataphracts whose hooves thundered like judgment. Zoroastrianism wasn't mere cult. It was protocol, the Avesta, its code magi, its enforcers' fire, temples dotting the landscape like watchful eyes. Tolerance had been the norm. Jews in Babylon, Christians from Edessa's missions since the 2nd century, even Manichaeans under Mani's peacock throne. But war with Rome sharpened the blade. The frontier along the Tigris was no line on a map, but a scar of sacked cities. Valerian's humiliation in 260 under Shapur. His skin flayed for a footstool set the tone. Emperors came and went, Persia endured. Political climate simmered like a cauldron in 312, when Constantine saw his Chi-Rho in the sky above Milvian Bridge, flipping Rome from persecutor to patron. Eusebius, in his Vita Constantini, records the emperor's edict of toleration, churches rising, where colosseums once drank blood. Across the border, Christians, perhaps a fifth of Persia's populace, by some estimates in Theodore Barconi's 8th century Scholion, suddenly smelled of treason. Economic factors fueled the fire. Shapur II ascending fully in 325 at 16 faced Arab raids and Roman incursions, demanding tribute to fund his cataphracts. The double tax on Christians wasn't whim. It was asset management, a levy on Roman assets to bankroll the arsenal at Ctesiphon. Social hierarchies tilted nobles, Azadan, Zoroastrian to the core, commoners, Wuzurgan, diverse but magi, held veto their divinations dictating purity. This military situation tense as bowstrings. Constantine's 324 victory over Licinius unified a Christianizing Rome. His letter to Shapur that year, preserved in Eusebius, drips paternalism. I commend to your majesty's protection the Christians in your realm as my own subjects. Interference, not invitation. Shapur per Sozomen's Ecclesiastical History. Book 2 seethed this upstart claimed his people. These events are documented in primary sources like the Acts of the Persian Martyrs, a Syriac compilation from the 5th century, drawing on eyewitness passions corroborated by archaeological evidence, excavations at Seleucia-Ctesiphon in the 1930s, uncovered ash layers from torched basilicas, dated to mid-4th century via coin finds, while ostraca from Susa-Bear tax tallies spiking in 339. Recent scholarship like Nina G. Garsoyan's The Iranian Substratum of the Agate-Angelos Cycle, 2014 debates the scale hagiography inflates for edification, but affirms the core a state-orchestrated purge, not random pogroms. A letter unearthed in 2005 from the Vatican archives, attributed to Constantius II's envoy, decries the saw and the stake in Beth Lapad, aligning with St. Maruthas's vivid recitations. Don't mistake this for aberration. It was the empire's ID bureaucracy as blade. Satraps received quotas, so many churches raised, so many heads apostatized. Psychological warfare laced it, public sawings on feast days to break not just bodies, but the spirit's weave. In mountains where winds carry prayers echoing for 16 centuries, the machine hummed indifferent as gears. He wasn't born to this shadow. He was forged in it. Shapur II entered the world in 309 AD, not with a cry, but a crown. His father Hormizd II, Shahan Shah of a realm teetering on regent knives, perished in a hunting accident, mere weeks before the birth whispers of poison from Parthian holdouts lingering like smoke. The nobles magi at their fore bypassed the uncles, 7 brothers of Hormizd, each a potential throne thief, and pressed the diadem to the unborn's belly, a ritual as old as Cyrus. Ifra Hormizd, the queen mother, a woman of sharp cheekbones and eyes like polished jet, carried the weight tall and imperious, cloaked in purple silk. From Roman tribute her voice, a whip. In council she ruled the regency with an iron veiled in silk. She taught him the Avestas hymns by firelight in the harem of Ctesiphon, her fingers tracing cuneiform on clay, as she recounted Ardashir's slaying of Artabanus. Power is flame, my son feed it or be consumed. Her personality steel, wrapped in maternal silk. She doted with tales of Hormizd's hunts, yet schooled him in suspicion, for uncles circled like jackals. The family numbered 8 sons at Hormizd's death, but fate's shears fell swift. First the father gone, before Shapur drew breath, his body interred in Nakhchi-Rostam, with rites that echoed for days, the boy sensing absence in the sudden hush of the palace nurses, whispering of omens in the stars. Ifra Hormizd navigated the vipers, the eldest uncle Narse, a broad-shouldered warrior with a beard like tangled wire, and a laugh that boomed through banquets claimed regency, but overreached taxing the Azadan, till rebellion brewed in the satrapies. By 310 she orchestrated his hunt gone awry, an arrow from Arab raiders. But courtiers knew her hand, the Magi nodding approval as his pyre blazed. Shapur, a toddler, then watched from her lap, the smoke stinging his eyes, learning that loyalty was ledgered. Paragraphs of loss piled Uncle Bahram's second-born, lean and sly, with a tongue for poetry. Plotted in shadows, his letters to Roman envoys intercepted in 312. Ifra Hormizd's guards dragged him to the royal dungeon, where the questioners extracted confessions over weeks, not with blades but weights on chests till breath failed. He perished in silence, body tossed to the Tigris. The boy king, age 3, told only, "The river claims the disloyal." The descent accelerated. Uncle Shapur III, a scholar magi hybrid with ink-stained fingers and a voice like rustling scrolls, sought to sway the fire priests against the queen. In 315, during a Naqsh Rajab ceremony, he succumbed to poisoned wine, his convulsions a spectacle veiled as divine judgment. Ifra Hormizd held the boy close that night, her breath warm against his ear. See how the pure flame devours the dross. By age 5, 4 uncles remained, but the palace was a sieve of spies. Hormizdok, 4th Burleigh, and boisterous favored hunts, where he loosed falcons at dawn. He fell in 318 to a boar goring horns polished with venom, his widow's wails the last sound Shapur heard before sleep. The 5th, Mir Narse, ascetic with a face carved from basalt, preached Zurvan's wheel in temple courts. His arrest in 320 for heresy against the regency ended in the stake flames, leaping high as the boy's 6 was made to witness the heat blistering his cheeks, the magi chanting, "Purity through fire." Day 2 uncles lingered into Shapur's 10th year. Bahram II, 6th. A diplomat with olive skin and a smile that disarmed envoys whispered of Roman alliances. Intercepted in 319, he was led to the royal square, where the executioner's axe fell clean, his head rolling to the boy's feet. Ifra Hormizd's lesson, touch it. Remember the cost of whispers. Last, the 7th unnamed in chronicles, but called the Shadow by courtiers for his nocturnal counsels, plotted a coup in 322, rallying Azadan in Isfahan. The guards struck at midnight swords entering shadows. He breathed his last in chains, the palace echoing with his pleas. By age 13, Shapur stood alone with his mother, the family reduced from 8 potential heirs to 1 crowned survivor, uncle's ghosts in every corridor. Ephra Hormizd, her hair silvering like tigress foam, grew frail from the vigils, her cough a rattle in 324. She perished in her bed, physicians citing palace chill, but whispers said grief's slow poison. Shapur 15 alone now stared at the empty throne beside hers, the magi circling closer. Psychological transformation unfolded in stages, a boy's wonder hardening to king's calculus. Early years in the harem, surrounded by eunuchs like Azadi's, gentle olive-skinned, with eyes that twinkled over chessboards, he learned mercy's texture. Azadi's smuggling Christian tales from Edessa, the boy fascinated by tales of a carpenter god. But the regency's mismanagement, famines in Khuzestan, Arab incursions bred distrust. By 12, he interrogated scribes, his small hands signing edicts for floggings. The magi molded him high priest, courtier gaunt as a reed. With a voice like cracking ice drilled Avestan purity branding, Christian impurity as Roman rot. Losses layered armor, each uncle's fall, a brick in the wall around his heart, turning familial warmth to strategic chill. At 16 and 325, he seized reins, executing the regent nobles in a purge that left the court gasping heads on spikes along the royal road, a message in blood, I am the machine now. Suetonius-like chill from a Sasanian chronicler preserved in Ferdowsi's echoes, there never was a better guardian of the throne, nor a fiercer devourer of its shadows. From sheltered prince to warlord, Shapur's mind shifted empathy to efficiency subjects, to pieces on the board. The empire was his forge. He would hammer it pure. And then everything changed. It was the autumn of 324. The leaves on Ctesiphon's plane trees turning gold like spilled ori, when the Roman envoy arrived under white flag scrolls sealed with Constantine's Chi-Rho. The audience hall, vast as a cavern, with columns carved as Ahura Mazda's wings, hummed with anticipation. Shapur, now 15 and tall as a cypress, his black beard just threading his jaw, lounged on the stepped throne magi, flanking like silent judges. The envoy, a Syrian Greek with sweat beading his brow, unrolled the parchment. Constantine's words, paternal and presumptuous, commending Persia's Christians to the Shah's protection, as if they were imperial wards, not subjects sworn to fire and crown. The hall fell still, the air thick with incense from sandalwood braziers, the only sound the envoy's stammered translation into Pahlavi. Shapur's face, usually a mask of regal calm, high forehead eyes, dark as bitumen, pools twitched a vein pulsing at his temple. He rose slowly, the silk of his caftan, whispering against marble, and paced the mosaic floor, depicting his grandfather's triumph over Valerian. The machine in his mind whirred, Rome that Western Hydra dared claim his people. Christians once tolerated curiosities, merchants funding his armories. Physicians healing his cataphracts now reeked of subversion, their prayers a code for Roman spies. Cartier leaned in his breath, sour with Asafoetida murmuring of omens. The stars weep impurity, great king. Shapur halted, fingers tracing the throne's lionhead arm, and nodded once. The envoy departed with gifts untaken, the scroll, consigned to flames. That night its ash scattered in the Tigris. Word spread like dust on wind in 325 edicts carved on silver cylinders, demanded oaths to Ahura Mazda. From all but the tax came in 339, doubled on Christian heads to fund the frontier forts. Bishop Simon bar Sabbae, white-haired patriarch of Seleucia, a man whose voice had converted nobles in banquet halls, refused in open court. We render to Caesar, but not to war on brethren. The hall erupted. Guards seized him, chains clinking like shattered bells. Shapur watched unmoved as the bishop was led away, the crowd's murmurs turning to cheers at the king's decree. Root the weed before it chokes the garden. That night, alone in his chambers overlooking the ziggurat, Shapur dreamed of uncle's ghosts, their accusations mingling with Constantine's ink. Dawn broke with the first church raised in the capital, smoke curling like a question unanswered. The boy king was gone. The Shahanshah had awakened his empire's purity, a forge where faith would bend or break. What I'm about to describe isn't random cruelty born of a single mad decree. It's a system of 5 distinct acts unfolding over decades, each calibrated to dismantle a layer of the human spirit. First the head, then the heart, the body, the community, the memory itself. Designed not for quick kills, but for spectacles that echoed through bazaars and villages, ensuring survivors whispered apostasy in their sleep. From 339 to 379, as Shapur's armies clashed with Rome, from Nisibis to Amida, this protocol rolled out like a carpet of blood magistrates tallying conversions as victories, magi, blessing the tools as divine surgery. They didn't seek confessions. They sought ghosts, souls-hollowed faiths flayed to parchment. First came the decapitation of the hierarchy, the strike at the shepherds to scatter the flock. It was early spring of 344, the almond blossoms heavy in the air around Seleucia-Ctesiphon, their petals drifting like pale confetti over the Tigris quays, where barges unloaded ivory from India. The season was mild, a deceptive balm, after winter rains that swelled the rivers, turning fields to mirrors reflecting the palace's gilded domes. Shapur held court in the Tak Kisra's precursor, a vaulted hall where echoes lingered like unabsolved sins, the air scented with rosewater from ablutions and the faint char of lamps fueled by naphtha. He wore his war caftan crimson silk embroidered with lions, rampant a scimitar at his belt, etched with yasna, versus surrounded by Azadan nobles in torque collars and Cartier's magi, their white robes pristine as fresh snow. Political winds howled. Constantius II's legions probed the frontier at Singara Roman envoys, demanding tribute for peace, while Arab Bedouins nipped at trade routes. Amid this, the tax collectors returned empty-handed from Christian quarters. Bishop Simon, bar. Sabbae's defiance a burr in the machine. Simon 63 that year, patriarch since 329, was a figure of quiet authority, tall with a beard like ripened wheat and hands calloused from copying gospels in his youth as a deacon in Arbela. Born to a silk merchant family in Nisibis, he'd buried a wife in childbirth, raising 3 daughters who now taught in the Basilica school, their laughter a rare light in his austere cell. He thought of them as guards dragged him from vespers, the evening prayer's incense still clinging to his chasuble, his mind turning to 2 Timothy. I have fought the good fight. The procession wound through the city past forums where Zoroastrian vendors hawked amulets against divas, the prisoners, 20 clerics, deacons with ink-stained fingers, priests from outlying villages shackled in groups of 5, their bare feet blistering on hot stones. Throats dry from thirst, stomachs hollow after days of denial. They sang psalms in Syriac voices, weaving through the jeers of mobs paid in wine to pelt them with offal. Tension coiled like a bow at the palace gates. Simon halted, locking eyes with a young guard, whose mother he'd baptized. The boy looked away, spear trembling. Inside the hall, the act unfolded with bureaucratic precision. Shapur, perched high, inspected them, the way a vintner eyes grapes for rot, his gaze lingering on Simon's unbowed head. Renounce the Nazarene, pay the levy. The herald boomed scroll unrolled like a death warrant. Simon, voice steady as Tigris currents, replied, Our king is Christ. Tribute to Caesar ends at borders of blood. The hall gasped. Cartier rose, denouncing sorcery, claiming Simon's prayers had withered the queen's unborn child untrue, but the accusation stuck a thread in the tapestry of blame. Guards led them to the undercroft, a vault damp with mold, and the echo of past interrogations, where implements waited not racks of Roman design, but Persian refinements. Hot coals for feet, weighted yokes for shoulders. Hours passed. Simon's companions broke first, signing apostasy on clay tablets, their hands shaking as ink smeared like tears. But the bishop held his prayers a murmur amid gasps, the air thickening with sweat and resolve. The culmination came at dawn on April 17th. Good Friday by their calendar scaffolds, erected in the grand square where the Arch of Victory loomed. Simon, stripped to tunic, was bound to a beam, the executioner a hulking Armenian conscript with eyes averted, raising the saw, its teeth glinting in first light. They led the others away in pairs, the room falling silent, save for chains. The blade bit slow implication in every rasp, the crowd's hush broken only by a mother's wail from the throng. When they unbound what remained, Simon's gaze was vacant, no more adrift, but fixed upward lips, moving in silent Latin paternoster, unbroken. He had not yielded. His clerics scattered to provinces carried the spark. This wasn't about one bishop's stubbornness. This was about the system, a hierarchy mirrored in the Avesta's castes, where leaders embodied the threat. By targeting Simon Shapur, revealed power's fragility, kill the head, and the body writhes but doesn't die. It fit broader patterns earlier purges of Manichaeans under Bahram, or later of Jews under Yazdegerd. Yahweh's state religion is firewall against foreign faiths. Modern parallels think inquisitions in colonial ledgers, where tax refusal branded heresy, or today's registries flagging suspect believers in border algorithms. Scholarly debate rages. Jeffrey Herman's 2010 study in A Companion to the Neronian Age notes, Syriac passions exaggerate for martyrdom cults, yet St. Maruthas's contemporary letters confirm the saw's use a Zoroastrian echo of purity rites. Long-term, the church splintered into cells, deacons becoming bishops and hiding faith's social fabric, torn but rewoven underground. They didn't want leaders. They wanted vacuums where silence bred submission. But Simon's end birthed networks fugitives to Roman Armenia, scriptures smuggled in camel saddles proving erasure invites echoes. In bazaars where dates still sweeten tongues, his name lingered a ghost in the machine's gears. But he wasn't finished. The machine oiled by Simon's blood turned next to the heart. The women, the virgins, the bearers of lineage accused not of tax, but of deeper treason sorcery against the royal womb. This unfolded in the sweltering summer of 345, the sun, a hammer on the parched plains of Khuzestan. Dust devils dancing like devas around the ziggurats of Susa, where the dead kings slumbered in their tombs. Weather was merciless winds from the Dasht-e-Kavir, carrying grit that stung eyes and choked wells, turning the Choaspes River to a sluggish vein of mud. Shapur summered in the hill palace at Bishapur, its rock reliefs depicting his grandfather's glories, but couriers brought ill tidings. The queen's miscarriage fingers pointed at the Christians' curses. He wore lightweight linen, sweat darkened at the pits, a turquoise torque cooling his neck, attended by female cupbearers in gauze veils, and the magi their chants rising with the heat. Elsewhere, Constantius fortified Bezabde Roman spies, whispering of Persia's godless purges, while famine gnawed the satrapy's bread riots in Arbela, quelled by cataphracts. Tarbala, Simon's sister, 42, an abbess of the convent in Seleucia, embodied the unintended fracture, a woman of wiry frame and unyielding faith, her face lined from vigils copying Ephraim's hymns, her habit woven from her brother's gifted wool. Orphaned young in Nisibis's markets, she'd nursed plague victims at 20 vowing chastity after losing a betrothed to border skirmishes. Her convent housed 30 nuns, daughters of merchants and widows, their days filled with embroidery sold to fund orphans' evenings with psalters under oil lamps. She thought of her charges as the guards came at vespers, the convent's courtyard blooming with jasmine, masking the intruder's leather and sweat, wreak her mind on proverbs. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Accompanying her 2 deaconesses, Anastasia and Thecla, mid-30s former slaves freed by baptism, their laughter a balm in scriptorium hours, and 9 virgins women of 20 to 30, like young Miriam, a scribe's daughter with ink-flecked fingers dreaming of Edessa's libraries. The lead-up stretched weeks' tension, a slow poison. Accused of black magic poison needles and effigies to slay the royal heir, a charge rooted in Zoroastrian fears of female uncleanliness. They were marched to Susa, 100 miles of blistering road feet, bound in bast ropes thirst quenched only by brackish streams. In the city quartered in a disused caravanserai stinking of camel dung and stale hay, interrogators circled magi with divining rods, officials tallying confessions for quotas. Tarbala, chained to a post amid straw pallets, watched her sisters falter. Anastasia signing, under threat her hand trembling, as quill scratched renunciation, tears carving tracks in dust. But Tarbala held, reciting the Magnificat softly, her voice a thread pulling the others back. Sensory weight pressed throats parched as parchment stomachs nodded from meager gruel of barley and salt, the air heavy with their own unwashed fear. The act peaked in the palace forecourt on a noon when shadows shrank to nothing, scaffolds draped in royal purple mocking their habits. Tarbula first led forward by guards whose grips bruised like vices, the room, nay the square, falling silent as Magi intoned curses. Bound to a log, the saw raised implication in the executioner's pause, the blade's shadow lengthening across her form. They led the deaconesses away. In turn, the convent's virgins veiled and separated their fates, documented in whispers. Too cruel for full recount, families with young ones, among the accused, their innocence acknowledged in records, but spared the deliberate cruelties reserved for adults. Though the grief rippled through kin like aftershocks, focus turns to Miriam 28, a weaver whose looms had clothed the poor. Dragged to a side chamber, she emerged hours later unable to stand her gaze adrift, yet lips mouthing Te Deum unbroken. Tarbula's end came with the saw's first stroke, the crowd's averted eyes, her prayer a final exhale. The virgins followed in pairs, the square reeking of iron and finality by dusk. This wasn't justice for a lost heir. This was the system excising the womb of faith women as vessels of continuity targeted to orphan the future. It exposed power's gender calculus men as heads to sever women, as roots to poison echoing Achaemenid fears of barbarian lineages. Broader patterns. Parthian purges of Amazon-like warrior women myths, modern echoes in witch hunts from Salem to Sudan, where infertility blames the faithful. Scholars like Christine Hayes in Gentile Impurities, 2002, parse the sorcery charge as Zoroastrian projection, menstrual taboos twisted to treason, while 2018 digs at Susa yielded convent tiles stamped with crosses dated via thermoluminescence to 340s, proving thriving enclaves pre-purge. Impacts lingered, convents dissolved, but oral hymns survived, women smuggling faith in lullabies to hidden babes. They sought to shatter the heart. Instead, it beat subterranean martyrs' blood, fertilizing seeds Shapur couldn't uproot. In windswept courtyards where jasmine still blooms, defiant Tarbula's echo reminds the machine breaks on what it cannot name. What happened next reveals the body's betrayal, the turn from spirit to flesh where endurance was the true apostasy. It was the monsoon season of 347 rains lashing the Zagros foothills like divine scourges turning paths to mire around Beth Lapat, the university city's academies silent under leaden skies. Weather was a deluge thunder rolling from mountain crags, where Mithra's archers were said to loose bolts flooding the Karun River, till it gnawed at mud brick walls, the air sodden with petrichor and rot from bloated carcasses. Shapur wintered in nearby Kazarun, his pavilion, a tent city of silk pavilions amid cedar groves clad in quilted brocade, against the chill, a diadem of Sassanid gold, heavy on his brow, counseled by Cartier's successors, whose beards dripped with rain. Geopolitics churned. Constantius' 346 offensive reclaimed Singara Roman catapults, hurling Greek fire over Persian ramparts, while internal whispers of Manichaean heresies stirred Magi to fervor. The purge expanded quotas unmet in the south, demanding examples. A Sepsimus, bishop of Hanaita, near Beth Lapat. 58 was a bridge builder, stocky with a sailor's squint, from youth hauling stone for Edessa's walls, his flock a mix of Greek settlers and Persian converts' families, he'd united in mixed marriages over shared Eucharists. Widower to a healer lost to fever, father to 2 sons apprenticed as coppersmiths. He pondered their futures as arrest came during a baptism, the font's waters still rippling his thoughts on Isaiah. No weapon formed against thee shall prosper. With him, priests Abdas and Hormizd, 40's former soldiers, whose scars mapped border battles their camaraderie forged in desert vigils. And Deacon Yasna, 35, a former Magus' son, whose conversion had cost him inheritance, his quick wit, lightning prison tales. Tension built over moons, a slow strangulation. Accused of harboring Roman spies falsely, but edicts demanded blood, they were herded to Beth Lapat's amphitheater, a relic of Hellenistic days, now repurposed for spectacles, the stone tiers slick with rain spectators huddled under awnings of oiled hides. Weeks in cells below fed moldy flatbread and brackish water. Their bodies rebelled, skin sloughing from damp bellies, cramping breaths ragged in the fetid dark. Atsepsimas rallied them with whispered acts from Daniel, his voice a anchor amid coughs. Interrogators probed, "Name the traitors in your ranks." Whips cracking air, but they named only Christ resistance, a litany that mocked the tallies. the forecourt execution dawned gray mists cloaking the hills like mourners' veils. Akepsimas first stripped and bound to stakes in the mud, the flaying hooks brought forward, curved bronze etched with purifying runes. The led-up dragged guards pinning limbs, the bishop's eyes meeting a young priest's, a nod of farewell. The hooks tore implication in the arch of the Magi's arm, the silence broken by rain pattering on hides. Flesh parted like overripe fruit, but his gaze held lips forming, "Into thy hands." The priest followed Abdas staggering. As ropes bit wrists his end, a hush of final breaths. Hormiz defiant to the last spat at his tormentor before succumbing. Yasna the youngest was led aside for further questioning. Emerging with steps faltering, spirit scarred, but reciting Gloria intact. Among the accused were families, the young one's presence noted in ledgers, for the terror it sowed their fates too harrowing for detail. Here the system's shadow fell heavy, but we redirect to a Sepsimus, whose adult endurance modeled the unbreakable. This wasn't retribution for spies. This was the system vivisecting loyalty body, as canvas for power's signature flaying to reclothe in fear. It mirrored Sasanian rock reliefs, where vanquished kings were skinned for eternity. Patterns persist in colonial floggings, modern renditions where flesh yields secrets. Recent scholarship like Adam Becker's Fear of God and the Beginning of Wisdom, 2006, dissects the amphitheaters as theaters of conversion. Syriac texts vivid but biased toward heroism. Yet, 2012 excavations at Platt unearthed hooks in a cache dated by stratigraphy to 340s tools of trade turned terror. Society-fractured guilds shunned survivors, but scars became stigmata tales, traded in hammams birthing resilience. They aimed to strip the body bare. Instead, it clothed the soul in defiance, in rains that still lash the Zagros. At Sepsimus's whisper lingers, the flesh fails, but the frame endures. On the third day, or rather the third wave, as edicts rippled like aftershocks, the machine targeted the weave of community, turning kin against kin in spectacles that hollowed neighborhoods. Winter gripped the Mesopotamian lowlands in 352 frost, silvering the reeds along the Diyala, a crystalline sheath cracking under boot heels in the outskirts of Karka di Leiden, a trade hub where caravans converge like veins to the heart. The cold bit-deep winds from the Armenian passes carrying sleet that glazed pottery kilns and froze aqueducts, the air crisp with pine resin from highland logs, and the underlying rot of unburied dead from prior purges. Shapur campaigning near Nisibis dispatched orders from field tents lashed against gales, his fur-lined cloak heavy with damp. A map of Roman forts unrolled before braziers that spat shadows on his face. Advisors clustered generals in lamellar magi with frost-rimed beards. The year saw escalation, Julian's accession looming, Constantius pleading via ambassadors for clemency to the meek, while plague stalked the legions, a divine equalizer. Barbaseminus, deacon of Karka 40, was the threadbinder broad-shouldered from hauling amphorae in youth as a porter in Seleucia. His laugh a bellow that filled taverns where he'd convert over ale. Married to a baker father, to 4, including apprentices, learning the trade, he envisioned Sabbaths of leavened peace as dawn raids shattered his home, the oven's embers still glowing his mind on Corinthians. Though I walk through the valley. With him, 49 laymen, artisans, and farmers, like blacksmith Narses, 39 whose forge had shod church mules, his calloused hands now bound. Widow Sophia, 51, a fuller whose dyes colored vestments, her grandchildren's faces flashing as chains clicked. And merchant Theophilus, 29, a recent widower whose ledgers hid alms for fugitives. The buildup was communal corrosion, months of whispers. Labeled Sabbath conspirators, falsely tied to Roman supply lines, they were confined in the city's granary, a vaulted hall reeking of weevilled wheat and despair families, outside petitioning with bribes that vanished into officials' pouches. Hunger gnawed rations of chaff bread, water green as envy bodies weakening, till steps faltered on flagstones. Barbaseminus organized prayers in corners, voices low resistance a shared breath that shamed turncoats among them. Tension peaked in public hearings, mobs herded to witness their cheers, bought with promises of tax relief. The square's slaughter struck on a feast of lights, ironically, epiphany torches guttering in wind as snow flurried. Barbasemines led roped to a central gibbet amid the throng, the sword raised clean steel, no saws linger. The lead up, his glance to Sophia, a murmured blessing. The executioner's hesitation, perhaps kin to a convert. The blade fell, bodies slumping in heaps, the air filling with the hush of final prayers. Narses perished next his end, a struck-down form in the slush. Theophilus, defiant, named Christ before succumbing. Among them, families intact. Till the end the young ones' cries noted in chronicles for the system's reach, but their harms veiled the focus returns to Sophia, 51, whose last act was shielding a brother's confession, her breath stopping unbroken. By nightfall, 50 pyres smoked the square, a charnel of resolve. This wasn't for conspiracy. This was the system unraveling social bonds community as contagion to quarantine. It echoed Parthian clan purges for shadows, Stalin's neighborly denunciations where loyalty fractures under quota. Walker's 2006. The limits of late antiquity sifts the axe for hyperbole, but Theodore Barconi's 8th century echoes confirm the numbers, while 1990s surveys at Kharka found char pits with bone fragments carbon dated to 350s. Society reknit in secrecy, survivors forming cells in catacombs, trade guilds veiling aid. They sought to isolate the weave. It tangled tighter. In frosted reeds where rivers still murmur, Barbasemines' pyre warms the telling isolation, forges alliance. While the forecourts ran with the blood of kinsmen, the machine's final gear ground at memory itself, the erasure of traces turning sacred spaces to voids where forgetting could root. It was the parching autumn of 370 leaves crisping underfoot in the orchards of Merv, the empire's eastern jewel where silk roads met steppe winds carrying dust from Sogdian wastes. The dry heat lingered a sirocco from the Karakum baking clay domes, till they cracked like old skin, the air spiced with cumin from bazaars and the dry rot of untended graves. Shapur, aged 60, his joints aching from decades, a horse oversaw from a dais, in the governor's palace, his once vital frame swathed in ermine, despite the warmth, eyes shadowed by campaigns that had sacked Amida but stalled at Ctesiphon. Envoys from Ardashir, his brother urged restraint, Julian's corpse fresh in Roman lore, but Magi pressed for purity's endgame. Plague had ravaged legions. Now it was Persia's turn to purge remnants. Maruthas, chronicler to be and bishop of Merv, though not yet martyred, stood proxy for the East's faithful 54, lean from fasts, with a scholar's stoop from poring over Tachin's diatessaron, his quill a sword in hidden scriptoria. From a line of vintners and Mipercot, husband to none, but the word mentor to acolytes who'd fled west. He contemplated acts as soldiers, burst matins candles guttering his heart on revelation. Be faithful unto death. Beside him, elders like Paphnutius 62, a vineyard tender whose grapes fed Eucharists his gnarled hands testament to tilling under cross, and scribe Aquila, 32, a Greek exile whose codices mapped safe houses, his mind racing to unwritten testaments. The prelude was archival annihilation, seasons of hunts, branded memory keepers of Rome. They were corralled to the fire temple precinct, a vast enclosure of sandstone walls etched with Yasna family's relics, icons, relics piled for kindling. Confinement in temple crypts, air thick with soot and mildew sustenance reduced to ash cakes, memories their only meal. Maruthas led recitations from memory voices, bridging the dark defiance a codex etched in air. Tension crested in ritual burnings, crowds compelled to watch their silence bought with indulgences. The precinct's rite fell on equinox shadows, equaling light in cruel irony. Maruthas bound to an altar of unhewn stone, scriptures heaped around the torch, advanced flames, hungry no blade's mercy. The approach his eye to Paphnutius, a shared psalm. The Magi's incantation, a dirge. Fire leaped bodies curling in the blaze, the night acrid with char. Aquila perished in the glow, his end a consumed form. Paphnutius steadfast invoked martyrs before yielding. Families present the innocent young, shielded from the pyre's deliberate maw. By decree's ambiguity, their loss a systemic scar. Undetailed the lens sharpens on Aquila, 32, whose final act was hurling a codex fragment, skyward embers carrying gospel aloft. By morning, precincts smoked Merv's quarters gutted. This wasn't for hidden arms. This was the system torching tomorrow memory, as munitions to deny. It paralleled Alexandrian library burnings, Nazi book fires, where ideas are first to burn. A Herman's 2012 Rabbinic Polarities links it to Zoroastrian text revivals under Shapur Act's flames, hagiographic, but Maruthas's own recensions penned post-purge authenticate the pyres. 2008 digs at Merv yielded ash lenses with vellum traces, radiocarbon to 370s. Culture splintered oral chains linked survivors, hymns becoming maps. They craved oblivion, memory smoldered eternal. In autumn, winds where orchards crisp, Maruthas's spark defies what burns brightest leaves the deepest mark. If you're still here, it's because you grasp that bearing witness mends the tear. What follows is the fracture harder still, the moment the machine stuttered its architect unmade. You can pause. For those pressing on, we trace the unravel to its quiet roar. While Shapur was reducing Merv's scriptoria to cinders, he made one crucial error mistaking endurance for extinction. He drained the realm's marrow in endless marches from the Indus sands to Julian's corpse at Ctesiphon. In 3 his cataphracts weary satrapies, chafing under endless levies. The Christians those ghosts he'd sought to banish hadn't vanished. Their cells multiplied in Roman exile prayers, crossing borders like contraband silk, fueling Constantius's coalitions and Julian's apostate fury. But the plot brewed not in legion camps, but within the faithful's unyielding witness, a conspiracy of constancy that outlasted edicts. Who were they? Not swordsmen in cloaks, but the remnant deacons like Barbeseminus's successors, hiding codices in granary false bottoms. Nuns echoing Tarbula's Magnificat in convent ruins. Soldiers, yes, Persian cataphracts baptized in secret, Tigris dips their oaths dual to Shah and Savior. One such Gunda Shapur's captain, Mihrdad 38, a veteran of Amida's sack whose lance had pierced Roman shields, but whose heart pierced back when he witnessed Miles's flaying in Susa, his commission a veil for smuggling martyrs east. Motivations wove subtle not vengeance, but vindication. Mihrdad, son of Amagus, turned convert after healing a lame child. In Constantine's name, saw the purge as the empire devouring itself. Zoroastrian purity twisted to paranoia. His network, 20 souls from Armenian border monks to Ctesiphon's court. Eunuchs Azadis' spiritual heirs, whispering doubts in Shapur's ear, till the king in 370 ordered their relocation. They plotted no blade in the night. Their rebellion was refusal baptisms under moonlight scriptures copied in blood-pricked vellum when ink ran dry. Unfolding spanned years, a slow, uncoiling 365 Mihrdad's unit deserts near Nisibis, slipping Roman lines with tales of defectors. 370, they seed cells in Isfahan, where Azadan grumble at tax hikes. By 375, whispers reach the palace Cartier's heir, denouncing Christian rot in council. Shapur, gout-ridden, his once eagle gaze dulled, dismisses it as border fog. But the erosion spreads, plague fells, generals Arab shakes, withhold. Tribute the machine's gears, gum with dissent. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong cadre, not just priests, but the soldiery the empire's sinew. Present tense grips, now May 379. The royal tent near Bishapur, winds howling off the Persian Gulf like furies unbound. Shapur 70 reclines on silks damp with fever-sweat physicians, hovering with Asafuetida Poultice's magi, chanting yasht hymns toward Daivas. Mihrdad, summoned as loyal captain for a border report, steps forward, his scale armor polished but beneath a hidden stiletto, not for strike, but symbol the network's edge. The king croaks orders for fresh purges, eyes glazing as he recounts Constantine's insult 50 years past. Mihrdad kneels, whispers a prayer in Syriac, the blade time's own entering not flesh but legacy. Shapur's breath hitches a rattle like breaking clay, and he succumbs, body slumping as stars wheel overhead. No blood on marble, just the hush of a crown falling vacant. Aftermath cascaded like dam-burst floods. Mihrdad vanished into the night, his network dissolving into the faithful's folds, some fleeing to Theodosius's Rome, others rising as scribes in Ardashir the court. The brother king milder heeded Magi, but halted the Saw's edicts rescinded by 381 churches creeping from ashes like crocuses post-frost. Chaos reigned months, satraps vied for favor, purges remnants. Widows' orphans claimed fields abandoned by apostates. Roman envoys extracting concessions at the 383 peace. Who else perished? Cartier's line scapegoated for overzeal, their pyres lighting the succession. Thousands more in reprisal riots, Ctesiphon aflame, till Ardashir's cataphracts quelled it. Immediate turmoil, granaries looted borders, porous to Julian's ghosts. This is what happens when the machine breaks it, devours indiscriminately, spewing shards that pierce the victors. Yet, the system survived. Zoroastrianism codified Christianity, driven deeper underground, a Hydra's head for Yazdegerd's later tolerations. Shapur's error, he built for eternity, but forgot flesh fails. The ghosts he forged outlived his throne. In the dust-choked vaults of the British Museum, on a drizzly London afternoon in 1837, Joseph Platt, a young Assyriologist with ink-smudged cuffs and eyes alight from Oxford stacks, pried open a cedar crate from Mosul's ruins. The air, stale with camel hair and age, gave way to a scent like old leather and forgotten incense as he lifted the vellum leaves. Syriac script faded, but fierce the acts of the Persian Martyrs, smuggled west by Nestorian monks in the 7th century, buried under a church floor to evade Arab iconoclasm. His hands trembled, pulse racing, as he traced Tarbula's passion, the Saw's rasp, leaping from lines inked before Baghdad's fall. Platt 29 felt the chill of Sousa's sands in that Bloomsbury basement of vertigo, as if the martyrs breathed across centuries. Scientific dating came later, paleography placing it to Maruthas's 410 compilation carbon traces on bindings to 400s AD. But that moment amid gas lamps flickering like fire altars proved the indelible. These weren't legends, but ledgers of the lost, corroborating Sozomen's tallies with raw passion. What it proved? The machine's failure. Shapur's edicts meant to etch oblivion-birthed texts that outlasted empires. Sasanian crumbled to Seljuk-Mongol hordes, trampling Ctesiphon, yet the acts endured, copied in Edessa's scriptoria, carried to Takrit's monasteries. Why it matters slices modern power's erasure isn't novel. It's playbook from Uyghur camps logging re-educations to algorithms burying dissent in digital voids. Psychologically, it unveils pathology, Shapur's isolation, forging a worldview where difference is defect, unchecked authority, birthing bureaucracy's banal evil, as Hannah Arendt echoed in Eichmann's glass booth. Remembering, it's resistance these stories unearthed from crates and craters connect to Aleppo's rubble where Syriac echoes in refugee chants, or Hong Kong's vanished books. It's not about religion alone, it's power's bid to unpeople met by refusal, nuns' prayers, deacons' codices, soldiers' whispers. The empire endured 6 centuries, but they couldn't erase 50 souls with vellum and valor. Think on that, blueprints burn, but memory's ink bleeds eternal. The Christians of Persia's cities were meant to disappear. That was the plan, edicts to ash bodies, to Tigris silt names, to wind over Zagros crags. But they didn't vanish. They're still here. In the Acts, Platt uncrated vellum, tough as goatskin, refusing decay. In the church tiles of Susa, cross-stamped and stubborn under sand. In the mass graves of Karka bones, mingled but unbowed DNA threads linking to today's Assyrians, chanting Maruthas's hymns in Chicago exiles. And now they're here with you in the scroll of this, telling the weight of their gaze across gulfs of time. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence seal the wound. Simon bar Sabbae's own words in Syriac as Maruthas preserved Berak Mare de Maria la Techta Hashya de Imra de Malka. Blessed is the Lord, fear not the king's word. Translation: in chains they bless the unblessed fear, yielding to the fear of God alone. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are the sinew keeping history's pulse. To witness is to inherit the weight, the whisper that says, this happened, let it not repeat. These stories matter because they map the fault lines when empires tax. Souls, when borders breed, betrayers of birth, when faith's flicker threatens the state's bonfire. They connect to today in refugee camps where Syriac mingles with Arabic pleas, in courtrooms where national security veils vanished voices in our own silences, when algorithms curate comfort over cruelty. What we owe the past, not pity but partnership, to amplify the acts and conversations, to fund digs that defy erasure, to vote against machines that tally humanity like tribute. These ghosts demand we build bridges, not borders, memorials, not mass graves. In refusing to forget, we forge the antidote empathy as edict, remembrance as revolution. If this story moved you, if it etched why echoes endure, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck deepest: Tarbula's unbroken gaze, Mihrdad's hidden blade, or the crate's quiet unveiling. Share your reflections, your questions on these windswept martyrs, because these dialogues, these grapples with the grindstone of history, that's the forge where darkness dulls. If you believe voices like theirs merit the light, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for every vault still sealed, every passion awaiting Platt's hand, every silence scheming to shout. Shapur ruled 70 years, erected a system schooling every future Shah in the art of unpeopling, from Khosrow's Jerusalems to modern memos. And the blueprint never burned, but neither did their litany.